Okay, let's jump right into a pretty powerful idea today.
Hmm.
What if those moments where life just seems to completely fall apart?
Yeah.
You know, a sudden health scare, maybe a big loss, a professional collapse.
Yeah.
What if those aren't just destructive?
Hmm.
What if they're actually like a profound, unexpected wake-up call?
That's a fascinating way to frame it, isn't it? The idea that, hitting rock bottom can sometimes crack something open.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, well, that intriguing idea is really the starting point for this deep dive. We're focusing today on the introduction of a book.
Okay.
It's written by a psychotherapist who's apparently seen this exact thing happen, firsthand again and again with clients.
Right. And they describe people who, outwardly, they have it all, big careers, the nice house, all
Yeah.
that stuff. But they feel this fundamental disconnect inside.
Mm.
Then, bam, a major life crisis hits them, just blindsides them, and it strips away all those external things.
Yeah.
And suddenly, that old ambition, it just feels meaningless. Their goals don't shine anymore. They feel really vulnerable, lost, which is painful, obviously.
Of course.
But as the source points out, it also creates an opening.
An opening. Yeah, the author actually uses the phrase where some light can finally get in through the cracks
Right.
that have formed in their protective foundations.
Mm-hmm.
And the core idea this source explores, the really compelling question it asks, is this.
Okay.
What if, underneath all the striving, the competition, the materialism that seems to dominate so many individuals and maybe even whole nations,
Mm-hmm.
what if there's actually an inherent goodness there, a fundamental, like a capacity for connection and compassion just waiting?
It's a view that really pushes back against, well, a lot of the standard ideas about human nature, doesn't it?
really does.
The author suggests that when clients are sort of cracked open by crisis, if you can help them stop those powerful, protective, success-driven parts of themselves from just slamming the door shut again.
Right, stop them sealing back up.
Exactly. Then they get the space, the breathing room, to explore what else is inside.
And that's where, according to this source, they can start to access what the author calls the self.
Mm-hmm. That's so.
Now, the book's intro, it describes this self not as some, vague concept, but as an actual internal essence.
Yeah.
Characterized by things like calm, clarity, compassion, connectedness. It's presented as a core that you can actually, feel, experience.
Right. And from that place, from the self, the source says these clients can start to really listen to other aspects of themselves.
Okay.
What the author calls parts. Parts that had been maybe pushed aside or exiled is the word used.
Exiled.
By those dominant, striving parts we were talking about.
So, okay, what do these clients typically find when they connect with this self and listen to these previously silenced parts? What does the source say happens?
Well, the author shares that they often find this deep resonance with really simple pleasures.
Like?
Things like enjoying nature, reading, creative stuff, just being playful with friends, seeking, deeper intimacy in relationships. And often a real desire to be of service somehow, to contribute.
Wow.
And then based on that, they make pretty significant life changes to actually prioritize this self and these parts they've rediscovered.
That sounds like a really profound personal shift.
Yeah.
But here's where the source takes it even further. It draws a direct and, frankly, pretty stark parallel.
Okay, how so?
They argue that these same dominant striving parts that can kind of rule individuals, well, they often seem to dominate entire countries.
Ah.
And they specifically reference their own country, the United States, in this context.
Yes, it's framed as a kind of collective mirror image.
Exactly.
Just like individuals who are only driven by those external success parts might neglect their own health or their relationships.
Yeah.
The source argues that countries obsessed with just endless economic growth seem to disregard the well-being of, most of their citizens or even the health of the planet itself.
And this kind of relentless, almost mindless striving, whether it's personal or national, it often leads to, well, a crash.
Right.
The author notes they were actually writing this introduction right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Which they propose has the potential to be a kind of global wake-up call.
A painful interruption.
A painful interruption that could force a pause, maybe lead to a greater awareness of suffering, and, crucially, a need to collaborate internationally instead of just competing all the time.
Right.
So the fundamental question the source is posing is, can we, as nations, as a world, change in those same deep ways that individuals sometimes can after a personal crisis?
But, and this is key according to the source, making those huge changes requires something fundamental. It requires a new way of understanding the mind,
Oh, yeah.
and maybe even a completely new story for humanity itself.
Right. The author quotes Daniel Christian Wall, who really emphasizes this point that humanity desperately needs a powerful new narrative.
Hmm.
Something to inspire global cooperation, to guide us through all these converging crises we face. And he highlights the idea of Spaceship Earth.
Spaceship Earth. I like that image.
Yeah, the idea that we're all fundamentally interconnected on this one planet, and therefore, caring for the whole group, the collective,
Yeah.
is ultimately the most effective way to care for ourselves and the people we love. It's not selfless, it's smart self-interest in a way.
So this us versus them mentality that you see defining so much of politics,
Yeah.
the author describes that as just deeply outmoded,
Yeah.
profoundly anachronistic, they say, for our interconnected reality.
Mm-hmm.
And they also bring in Jimmy Carter, quoting him on the need for leadership that actually fosters confidence in our inherent goodness and ingenuity.
Instead of fear-based leadership.
Exactly. Moving away from leadership based on fear.
But the challenge, as the source sees it, is that so many of our basic institutions, our societal structures, they're built on what the author calls the dark view of humanity.
The dark view,
Meaning an understanding that really emphasizes the negative stuff like selfishness, competition, the idea that we're inherently out for ourselves.
okay. And the author gives a really specific example of where they see this dark view deeply embedded, right?
Right, they do. They point to the economic philosophy of neoliberalism.
Which has been hugely influential in, well, many countries for decades.
Absolutely. And the source argues that neoliberalism is basically founded on the belief that people are fundamentally selfish.
Right.
And that society is essentially just a survival of the fittest arena where government should just get out of the way as much as possible.
And this economic philosophy, the source contends, precisely because it's rooted in that belief about inherent selfishness, has directly led to the massive inequality, the disconnection, the polarization that we see so much of today.
So from this perspective, it's like Exhibit A for why we need an alternative view of human nature.
Exactly. One that can actually unlock our capacity for collaboration and genuine caring.
Okay, so if the source makes this case for the problem, the dominance of this dark view and its consequences, where do they suggest this necessary new view comes from?
Right.
How do you actually shift from seeing humanity as inherently selfish to seeing it as inherently good and interconnected?
Well, this is where the author introduces their life's work. It's a model and a practice called internal family systems.
IFS.
IFS, yeah. Developed over more than 4 decades, apparently. And the source presents IFS not just as a type of psychotherapy, but as something that's evolved into both a kind of spiritual path and a really practical way of living day to day.
And the, I guess, bold claim the source made
Yeah.
is that IFS provides a framework and specific practices, including exercises they actually describe in the book, that allow individuals to basically experientially confirm these pretty radically positive ideas.
Right. About the fundamental nature of the mind, the essence of human goodness. It's not just a theory you have to believe.
No.
It's something they claim you can actually experience for yourself.
At its core, the source describes IFS as a method for relating internally to your own different parts and also relating externally to other people in a fundamentally loving way. It's presented as something you can actually do, like daily, moment to moment.
Yeah, it makes complete sense that the author anticipates skepticism, right?
Yeah.
Especially making claims like these right at the start of the book.
Sure, absolutely.
But the invitation seems to be for that skeptical part of you, the listener, to just allow enough curiosity to maybe try the ideas, try the exercises they suggest,
Yeah.
and just see what you personally experience. The source really emphasizes that the true understanding in this context comes through that direct trying and feeling it out.
And the source suggests that this kind of experiential shift, grounded in understanding and accessing that core self through practices like IFS, that's what allows us to move beyond those really narrow, like egocentric, family-centric, even ethnocentric perspectives.
Or something bigger.
Exactly. It's presented as the path towards becoming more species-centric, biocentric, planet-centric, and crucially, it's presented as the necessary foundation for making the profound changes needed, both, inside ourselves and potentially across the globe.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap the journey we've taken through this introduction. We started with that powerful idea, didn't we? Individual crises as potential wake-up calls, leading people to discover this deeper connected essence the self.
Right, and allowing them to connect with those previously ignored aspects, the parts.
And then we explored that really compelling parallel the source draws
Yeah.
between those individual experiences and the potential for societal crashes, like the pandemic was suggested.
Yeah, serving as potential collective wake-up calls, asking if nations could actually shift from just competition to more collaboration and address suffering more effectively.
Then we saw the source lay out this core conflict, the potential for a new paradigm based on inherent goodness and interconnectedness, that spaceship Earth view, contrasted really sharply with what the author calls the dark view and the institutions built on it.
And they use that example of neoliberalism, arguing it's fundamentally rooted in the belief that people are basically selfish.
Right.
And that this leads directly to inequality and division.
And finally, we learned that the source introduces internal family systems, IFS, as a specific practice developed over decades.
Yeah, presented as a way for individuals to experientially confirm this alternative, more positive view of human nature, highlighting it as a kind of loving, daily, moment-to-moment life practice.
So thinking about all of this,
Yeah.
why does understanding these different perspectives on human nature, the dark view versus the source's proposed view of inherent goodness, why does that matter for you listening right now?
That's a good question.
How might the view you hold, maybe even unconsciously, influence your day-to-day interactions? Or the kind of goals you set for yourself? Or how you think about and approach these huge global challenges we're all facing?
It really does make you question the assumptions underlying so much of how we kind of live and organize society, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So here's a thought-provoking question drawn right from the heart of this material, just to leave you with something to mull over.
Okay.
If this source is right, if humanity truly is inherently good and deeply interconnected at its core, what fundamental aspects of our society, or maybe even aspects of your own life, might need to profoundly change to actually align with that reality?